Notion charts are an amazing tool to visualize all the data in your Notion workspace. But trying to find the right chart for your situation can get a bit confusing. So in this video, I'm going to break down all the charts that are currently available in Notion. And that's not just the charts with the new chart feature. So buckle up, because we have a lot of Notion charts to explain. Alright, so here's our program for today. We have pie charts, regular and stacked bar charts, a normal line chart, and then this subtype of a burn up or burn down chart, and flow charts, and last but not least, combo charts. And we'll explore how to get every single one into Notion. And of course, we have to start with the pie chart and the new Notion chart feature. It makes these things so much easier. So if you want a pie chart, well, the easiest way to get one currently is to just type /chart, and you can pick, they call it the donut chart, right from the dropdown. Now, you have two options when you do that. You can either pick any of your existing databases to visualize the data in there, or you can start with a blank database. And let's actually do that, because if you do that, Notion will automatically create two views for you. A chart view and then a data view, so you have something that is starting to be visualized. The best use case for pie charts is to visualize how a complete thing breaks down into its individual subcategories. So, prime example, of course, tasks or projects, right? And you want to visualize, okay, how do they look across the different status levels. Another great example would be if you have time tracking or a schedule, and you want to see how much time is spent across these individual elements. Or in another use case, expenses, right? And you want to see this is how much I spent, but how does it actually roll up into the different categories. So let's just quickly show that example as one use case. Let's go here, say, okay, we want a new view, a new chart view, please. And we pick our donut chart. And then in terms of the settings for donut chart, you basically just have two options, right? You want to show the category, so what do you want to break down? And then how do you want to count the individual elements? So here it automatically picked category. That's great, that's what we want. And currently though, each slice represents count. So it simply represents how often it appears in my expense list, right? So I have 7 expenses in the category groceries. That's typically here, not what I want to see though, right? With tasks and projects, yes. But here I want to see of course, the amount value, and I can change it by clicking on each slice represents and then going to amount and say, okay, please give me the sum. And now I see things change a bit, right? Like my office supplies, even though there are not that many expenses for it, make up the largest chunk. Groceries jumps down a bit. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about the pie chart. Two last things. In terms of color, right? You can always switch the color scheme from auto to colorful or one of the shadings. Though in particular with pie charts, I would recommend to leave it on auto, because then you can influence these individual elements by changing the color of the tag. So let's say groceries. I actually want groceries to be blue, and I want health and wellness to be purple, right? Just to get some other colors in and have the scheme a bit different. And we see now it automatically adjusts my colors here. Next up, bar charts. Again, super simple to create. If you want to do it from scratch and don't have any other data you want to visualize, you can just type /bar and you get your vertical or horizontal bar chart. Both work pretty much exactly the same way. And then we see our breakdown here. Now, of course, the first thing that we can use these for is very similar to pie charts, in that we just want to, visualize how things break down across categories. So here we have just the same visualization as above, just now it's with a bar. Alternatively, same for expenses, right? So if we wanted to do this, we can just grab our view from above. Let's copy the link to the view, add it down here below, and in here, now this time, turn this into a version where we have a bar chart. All we need to do to change it, right, go to a vertical bar, and now we have it here, and we can also sort it from high to low. So we can get this quick breakdown. Okay, how do our expenses break down? The bar chart is particularly helpful if you have like a larger number of, different categories, because it can get quite, hard to see these small ones in a pie chart. Another great thing about bar charts is that we can use them to visualize things over time. So in this case, we have donut sales, and now let's say I want to see, how it breaks down over time. With a pie chart, that's just not possible. But here I can go in, again, create a new chart, say a bar chart, and initially it will just show me, my sales by the day and numbers board. That's of course not what we want to see. So instead, we want to switch it to date of sale. And we see a cool thing about Notion charts is that if we have a date property, it gives us these different options to pick from. So even though I have always only a date in, I can also accumulate them to a week or aggregate them to a week or month. But let's start with the date. And for now, let's not show the count, but let's actually show, how much we made. And there we see, okay, on these days, we made the most money. But you also see if you have a lot of entries, that can get quite overwhelming quite quickly. So instead, what we want to probably do in a bar chart is we want to group these things together. So we say date of sale, please give me my week, and then don't show me the count, show me the amount made. And then I see quickly, okay, October 2nd to October 9th, that was my most successful week so far. All right, but what if you want to break it down by a category or like by a time thing that we don't have so far? Let's say you want to break it down by day of the week, right? That's not an evolution over time, that's a category, like which day of the week do we have the most sales? Well, but that we can actually go in and just create a simple formula. So let's go in here, say formula, day of the week. And all we need to do is grab our date of sale and then type dot format date. And then in format date, you can put in the format it should be turned into. And 4 small d's is the code to turn it into the actual day of the week. And that means we can now head back to our chart and say, okay, the thing I want this to be broken down by is the day of the week. And now we will get our individual days of the week down here. And then we can say, please show me always the sum. And now, of course, it's not ordered properly. So when it comes to sort by, we probably need to set this to manual. And then have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Perfect. And now we see, in general, it seems like people buy most donuts on Sunday or on Tuesdays. Great. So that's where we maybe want to have most people in our store to make sure we can handle the amount of orders. Moving on to stacked bar charts. Now, stacked bars are one of my favorite charts ever in Notion because they help you gain so much insight with in just a very little space. It's not a separate chart type, so the way it works is that we still create a normal bar chart, but then we need to change one thing in the settings. We need to go in, and where it says group by, that's how we activate a stack. So I think that this is actually not the ideal name for this feature because it does the very opposite of grouping. Instead of grouping values together, it splits them into the individual parts. So let me show you what I mean. We have our donut sales again, and now let's assume we want to see, okay, our products, how much of that do they make up, right? Maybe on Sundays we sell a very different product very well than on Tuesdays. So to that, let's click on group, and here we want to now have the product name as our breakdown category. And we see, okay, chocolate sprinkles, that seems to be pretty much the constant throughout the week. On Saturdays, for example, we never sold any jelly filled. But yeah, with the stack bar chart makes it super easy to quickly see how these things break down. Now, one other quick thing, not technically a stack bar chart, but while we're at the grouping feature, you can always move the stacks into individual bars by going on more style options and then changing the group style from stacked to not stacked. Then you actually get these things next to each other. But it really depends on the type of chart that you have, whether this helps the visualization. Here's another way to create a stacked bar chart. In this case, we have team tasks. We have a responsible person, a status, and a due date. And let's say I want to visualize, okay, which person has how many open tasks, and out of these open tasks, how many are overdue. Now, for that, we need to add one simple formula, check whether a task is overdue or not. So let's go in first and say, okay, formula, call this overdue, question mark. And our formula can be pretty simple in most cases. We can just say, okay, please give me the check whether the two things actually need to check. First, check whether the due date is smaller than our current date. And then the second thing that we want to check is whether the status is not done, right? Because it's done, then it's definitely not overdue. So status is not equal done. All right. Simple formula, simple enough. And we see, okay, some of them are overdue, some of them are not. Perfect. Now let's go to visualize, plus chart and our bar chart. And we want to see the responsible person for sure. Now, what we want to then show is the count of tasks. That's correct. But we want to add a few filters. First, the filter that we want to add is we want to make sure that the tasks that we show are only the ones that are still open, right? We want to sort of visualize our workload. So the status is supposed to be is not done. That's the first part. And then the second, I'm sorry, that's actually everything for you. That we grouped some tasks, right? Now we say, okay, how many tasks do they have left? The second thing that we need to do is we want to say group by, and please group them by the fact of whether or not it is overdue. And now we see, okay, Bob, perfect, he has no overdue tasks. Carol, one overdue task, and so on and so on. So quick and simple way to utilize a stacked bar chart in Notion. Next, how to create a line chart in Notion. Now, for line charts, you basically want to have values over time, and ideally over a fairly large amount of time, because line charts are best if you want to visualize, well, trends over time. So in this case, we have revenue, and we have revenue for our coffee shop, and daily revenue. And what we can do now is we can just again, as usual, go on plus and say, give me a chart view, and then please give me a line chart. And by default, it's not the best at picking which values it should visualize. So clearly on the x-axis, 9 out of 10 cases in terms of a line chart, we want the individual dates. So we go to date and then pick the individual day one for now. And then instead of showing the count, which is just a flat line, we want to have our revenue for the day. And now we see, okay, this is how our revenue spikes over the different time frames. So it seems to be in general, trending up. So that's nice. We can, of course, if we wanted to smooth the line chart, so we can switch it from blah, 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 under style options to a smooth line. And that helps us, see it a little bit better. Although with a lot of entries, right, it can still be tough to make out the overall trend. So a great thing to do once you have a lot of entries is to start breaking it down, right? So go in and say, please, instead of showing me the whole thing, show me the week by week trend. And again, we need to then switch it from count to revenue SAR. And there we see quite nicely, okay, we start from 3K, 3.6, and now we're slowly working our way up to 4K. Of course, we have this sharp drop open here at the end, but that's just because this week isn't complete yet. So if we wanted to, we could use a filter to cut that one off. Now, one small tip for line charts, in case you actually don't want to visualize the trend over time, but more like how something accrues over time, you can turn on a really cool toggle called cumulative. And this then, instead of showing you the individual values, will show you how the total increases. So in particular for in the revenue, right? This could it will tell you, okay, how is your total income looking like over the period? Pretty much straight and up, right? Maybe because it's AI generated sample values. But yeah, still quite nice to see that the curve is going in the right direction. Before we continue with the next chart, quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, Tally. Tally is a really simple but super powerful form builder that I've been personally using for years. And just like Notion, Tally is block-based, which means it's super simple to start creating your first forms. Let's say, for example, you need a form for your waitlist for your new product launch. Well, super simple, we just give it a title, and then in the body of the form, well, we have our slash commands, just like a Notion, so we can say, please give me a short answer, so what's your name? And then below that, we can say, give me here now, please, an email, right? So we want our email sign up. What's your email? And that's pretty much it. Now we can publish the form, share it, and then collect all the responses. Tally also integrates with Notion out of the box, so you can send all your form submissions to your Notion databases. I use Tally for so many things. For example, you see I have a form with more than 30,000 submissions. If you join my newsletter and you fill out the initial onboarding survey to figure out, how I can best help you, that's, for example, hosted and powered by Tally. Tally also has one of the most insane free plans that I've ever seen on a tool. So to get started with Tally for free, just check out the link in the description, create your account, and see what all the hype is about. Seriously, it's so good that whenever someone asks me what form builder they should use, I always say Tally. So yeah, I'm beyond thrilled to be sponsored by one of my favorite tools ever, and now back to my other favorite tool, Notion and Notion Charts. Next, how to create a burn down or burn up chart in Notion. Now, if you don't know what a burn up or burn down chart is, it's basically a specific type of a line chart that shows completion over time. So one prime example for that is if you work in a sprint model. And with the sprint, you have a fixed duration, and that duration, you want to finish as many of the tasks in that sprint as possible. And the burn down or burn up chart visualizes how over every single day of your sprint, you're able to tick things off the list. So setting this up requires actually a few extra properties, but don't worry, it's fairly straightforward, and I'm going to walk you through exactly how to do it. Our basic setup is simple. We have two databases, one for sprints and one for tasks. And then, of course, all our tasks are connected to sprints. In terms of properties, what we need to have at the minimum is a done date in our task section. Now, don't worry, you don't need to fill that out manually. Thanks to Notion's recent database automations, we can now automate that within the system. So what you want to do first is you want to go in here and you want to create an automation. I've already set one up, but I'll set up a new one from start, just so you can follow along. The first thing you want to say is, what is the trigger? Well, whenever for any of our elements, our status is set to done. That's the trigger. And if that's the case, then what we want to do is we want to fill out the done date. And we want to fill out the done date with the current date. So that means if I were to now create here another task, let me just show you. So sample task, we see our done date is empty, but the second I switch this to done, after a few moments, this will be filled out by the automation to today's date. There it is, August 9th. That's pretty much half the battle to visualize our progress over time. So if we now go in here and say, please give me a chart, and I want to have a line chart, and on the x-axis, I want to show my done date by day. And then on the y-axis, I want to show the tasks, so the amount of tasks that I have done in a single day. We see first we get a chart that shows us just how much we've managed to do. So it tells us that we had a peak of productivity here. But of course, the drawback of this visualization is that it doesn't tell me, okay, well, am I anywhere close to finishing everything that I wanted to do? In order to do that, we need to turn on one extra property, and that is cumulative. And that now means, right, that instead of just showing us individual values, it shows us how they add up. But there's still one problem. In this base version of the chart, we get the absolute number of tasks that we finished. And of course, we might be able to go on our sprint, right, and write a simple formula here that tells us, okay, how many tasks are there? So task number can go in here, say formula, please give me the tasks, and then give me the link that gives me how many tasks are there connected. And we see, okay, 29, we have 29 done, so perfect. But of course, it could be a different situation. Some of the tasks couldn't be finished, and we don't want to really compare it. So instead of having the absolute numbers, ideally, we have here the percent value of everything so that we see, okay, are we reaching 100% or not? And for that, we need to further modify our data. So the best way to do this is to first go on sprints and add here a calculation, figure out, okay, how much does every individual task contribute to the total, to the total sprint? And it's fairly straightforward to do it. All we need to do is create another formula. We can just call this, task percentage, something like that, or task contribution. Makes more sense. Contribution. And then we just take 1 and divide it by our task number. And that means we see now, okay, every single task will contribute 3.4%. We can actually switch this to a percent just to make the display a bit nicer. Oops, here, percent. Perfect. And then here in tasks, we can now pull this value in. Very important, we want to pull it in with the formula because currently we can't create charts based off rollups. So we'll say, okay, give me the, again, like the contribution. And of course, it's the same for every single task, right? Every single task is the same contribution of 3.4. So we take a sprint, we say first, and then we take the task contribution. And this gives us then the relevant value for every single element. Again, we could switch it to percent, but here, actually, let's do it. Otherwise, our chart will look a bit off. So let's go in here, edit property, and then number format, again, percent. Perfect. And then we can hide this because we don't need to see it in here. And now if we go to the chart, what we can do is we can switch it from visualizing the count of the individual elements to the contribution value. And that means we now have, instead of these our absolute values, our relative values, and they run all the way up to 100%. Right now, it's still at 120 here on the scale. Right now, we can't unfortunately change the scale in Notion. And because we switched back from the other value, it's a bit annoying. But actually, maybe if we refresh the whole page, it sizes it down to 100%. Again, some things still need a little bit of polish, but still, if you build it, if you build it from start with only this value, it should actually stop at 100. Otherwise, I hope they allow us to change the scale here at some point, the axis. Either way, you know now that you've reached 100% at the end of your sprint. Now for a burn down chart, things will become a little bit more complicated, but bear with me. We create a new formula property, and we'll call this burn down. And in here, what we want to do is we need to figure out, okay, if we look at every single task, how is the progress of the sprint based on the current done date? So in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to go in the sprint relation. And from the sprint relation, we want to grab our whole tasks. So we go in and say, please give me the number, give me just the different tasks that we have here. Perfect. Then we need to filter that task array, right? So if we just say, okay, done, what we get here is just the exact list of tasks. But that's, of course, not what we need. We need only the tasks that have been done up until the point of this done date. So in order to do that, we go back in and we say, okay, please, first we need to do flat. That's the medium operator to be able to manipulate this array again. And we say, please filter this for everything where the current done date, so the done date of the entry here that we look at, is either smaller or equal to the done date from our main element. So that will filter down the list quite a bit. So if we turn on wrap column for a second, we see up here, that's correct. We have 3 tasks, right, that share the same done date or have a smaller done date than August 5. On August 6, we add 1 more, so we had 4. On August 7, we had 1, 2, 3, 4 more. So we are now at 8, I think, and so on and so on. Which then means we can further manipulate our formula and grab the length of this whole thing. So now we know how many tasks were done at any given snapshot point, which means we are nearly there. Now we just need to figure out, okay, again, what does this represent in terms of percentage? So we want to, and let's just go in a new line to make this a bit easier to read. We want to divide this whole thing by the by our total number of tasks. And total number of tasks, remember, we have it in sprints. So we go sprints first and then take the task number. So now we see, okay, this is our completion rate at every single step of the turn. But of course, you see again, right, this would be the burn up way because we go from 10% all the way to 1. So last but not least, what we need to do is we need to just subtract everything from 1. So we need to do 1 minus, and now we see we get our formula correctly. If we turn it back into percent, it will be a little bit more easy to read. Percent, perfect. And we see we go from 89 to 0 to completion. Now, if we want to make it a bit prettier in terms of the small ones, we could round this now. But let's leave it here for this purpose like that for now and just look at how it visualizes on the chart. So we go back to the chart and we switch from our contribution to the burn down. And in terms of the burn down, one thing that's important, now we need to turn off cumulative, right? Because we have it already built into the formula that we go from 0 to 1. Oops, sorry, it shouldn't be the sum. It should be the average because it's always the same value. And then we see we go down from 90 to 100% nice in our burn chart. One thing that's good to keep in mind with this is that this can be quite resource intensive in terms of calculations because we have some recursive logic in the formulas, right? They need to do a lot of math in order to get to this value. So for like a normal sprint system, this should be no problem. But if you have a lot of tasks, you might notice some slowdown in terms of the rendering of this chart. The second point where this is not a perfect solution yet is when you move tasks between sprints. Oftentimes, you don't finish every single task in one sprint, and then you move it to the next sprint, and then in that sprint you might finish it. So it might have a done date later down the line, but not in actually the current sprint. And that would, of course, then lead to some wrong numbers for historic data. And there are ways to bulletproof the formulas against that, right? So you could modify this formula to check to only count a task if the done date is within the sprint duration. Again, all possible, but this would now go a bit beyond this video where we focus on all the different chart types. So if you want to see a really deep dive into the different ways of how we can create these burn up or burn down charts, let me know down below in the comments. But just so you know, this might be an issue you run into if you roll this out in your company, but there are ways to solve it. Moving on, how can you create a Gantt chart in Notion? Now, in order to do that, you first need a database that has, well, at least the name, and then you need a duration. And you can have the duration in two ways. You can either have a separate start date and end date property, or you can just create a single date property, and then in this date one, you can say, okay, I want to turn on an end date. Sometimes that's a bit more cumbersome though, because you always need to do that extra click. So oftentimes I like to have them separate. Doesn't really matter, personal preference. Now, the next thing, or the way you get a Gantt chart in Notion is by, again, a database view, but it's actually not under the chart option. So you see here you have bar, line, and donut charts, but the Gantt option is actually a timeline view in Notion. So they call it timeline. It is a Gantt chart. Either way, this is how you can get it. And in order to actually fully work with it, let's quickly turn on the full width of our page, because that just makes it a bit easier to see that. You see, right now, nothing really shows up, and that's because we need to set up the parameters for our Gantt chart. So let's click on the three dots and then go under Layout. And here we see that Show Timeline By. So we will go in here and we want to have it shown by start date, but we want to have separate start and end dates because, again, right, we have that set up that way. So if you have it one property, you don't need to do that. In this case, we need to do that and explain to Notion that end date symbolizes the end date and start date is start. And now we have our general setup. So we see things spread here. We have our elements. If we scroll here, right, we see, okay, this is where sustainable certification goes. Of course, if I change like an entry, right, if I move it around, it automatically changes the date for it. It also actually visualizes maybe by quarter, because I think we have very long entries here. So we see, okay, our annual financial audit, I can shorten it. Oops, this is how I open it. I can shorten it by hovering over the end, and then I get this drag line, and I can say, okay, it actually goes from September there to 14th. Now, one thing that I like to do, just to make it a bit easier to read this chart, is to add a sort. So I'll click on the arrow and I want to sort it by start date ascending, just so these things stack a bit neater on top of each other, and so you don't need to scroll around a bunch to find the relevant entry. Perfect. So let's actually go all the way to the side where our earlier projects start, and then we can start building it from here. Okay, perfect. That looks good. Now, the next thing that you can do if you have a Gantt chart is you can go into the settings, and again under layout, not on the layout, now under customize projects, and you can turn on dependencies. In most situations when you have a Gantt chart or a timeline, this is what you want to have, where you are able to mark how some things connect to others. So you can just click on add, and now you have a few options to set this up. One cool little extra feature of dependencies and timelines is that when you shift something and you have a dependency, you can choose to shift all other elements as well. Now, that's particularly useful, right, if you have certain projects and they depend on each other, and you need to make sure that, okay, if the due date of one thing changes, then all the others also need to change accordingly. The two options that you have here are to shift only when dates overlap. So it means only when, the end date of the project starts being after the start date of the next one. Or you can say, I will always shift and maintain the time between items, maybe because you say, okay, I have certain blockers that I want to make sure that we always have this buffer between. But let's stick this shift when only when dates overlap. We can also choose to avoid weekends, so it never will push it on a Sunday or Saturday. And then again, under shift using, we need to make sure that we use separate end and start dates. And then we can turn on dependencies. And now what happens, if we hover over the end, we get this yellow little icon. And we can start dragging that to something else which is dependent on. And you see the second I do this, it actually puts now the marketing campaign down there. Because remember, I turned on shifting. So it makes sure that the start date of the marketing campaign is after my new market design. Same with the customer feedback. Maybe the customer feedback survey actually needs to be done before we start our marketing campaign. So again, I will drag this here. Sometimes a bit tricky to get it to the point where it needs to be. And it also pushes automatically the marketing campaign even further back because our customer feedback survey needs to be there. One important thing is it doesn't work the other way around, right? So if I move this here, it won't push this back because I didn't say to keep always the same distance. I said to only push it if we have a later start date. But for that, it works quite well. So these are the basics for the Gantt charts. There are a bunch of other things that you can do, right? You can turn on, since it's a normal database view, you can turn on other properties. So if you have, the people that are responsible for it, you can turn it on under properties. You can change the way the timelines work, where we already had a quarter, so we could look at it from a year perspective and so on and so on. So quite useful for that. One last thing, one alternative way to change dependencies is by going back to your table. And you see Notion automatically created these bidirectional relations for us, which are called block by and blocking. And through that, we can then indicate, okay, which things should be linked to each other. All right, now next question, how can you add a flowchart to Notion? Now, there are basically two ways to achieve this. The first one is the much easier one and the one that I would usually recommend. And that's to actually go into a dedicated flowchart tool. My favorite one is Whimsical. Create your flowchart there and then embed it, because Notion has rich embeds with most of them. So for example, with Whimsical, what I can do is I can just paste it here and then choose the preview option. And if you've never connected your Whimsical account, it will prompt you to connect and authorize it. But if you've done so already, you see that I just now get my board from Whimsical here. And I can fully navigate it and to use it to just, scroll into, look at these things, and then, showcase the dedicated flowchart builder. And most of the time, right, these tools have a lot more options in order to build these charts. So that would be my go-to method. But if you don't want to do this and you want to do it inside Notion, there is a way. Because Notion supports something or supports a code language called Mermaid. And Mermaid allows us to write a code that can then be rendered as a flowchart. Now, let me give you an example. So what you want to do for this is type code. And then you want to paste your Mermaid snippet. So I've prepared already something. This is how a typical Mermaid code looks like. And you see it turns into this nice flowchart. Now, of course, I don't have to watch it with the code. I can flip it from split here to preview. And that gives me then just this nice little flowchart that I can then, modify and change. One extra thing, you need to make sure that your code is set to Mermaid. So if it's set to Java or something else, right, it won't work. So you need to make sure here you look for Mermaid. Now, of course, I hear you, right? Like writing Mermaid code is probably not something that everyone just does on a random afternoon. I can't write it myself, but thanks to AI, we don't have to do it, right? Just go to ChatGPT or your AI tool of choice and explain the flowchart that you want to have. Maybe even just add a screenshot if you've already, scratched it out somewhere, and then ask it to give you the mermaid code for that. And then you have this, can add it to Notion. So that's the one way to, semi-natively create flowcharts right in your Notion workspace. Last but not least, how can you get a combo chart in Notion? Combo charts, as you might know, are charts that combine several different chart types in one visual. And then usually you have two y-axes to, have the parameters look a bit nicer. Now, in Notion currently, we can't create these natively because our new options for line, bar, and pie chart don't allow us to connect several charts into, one element. But what we can do is we can use a third-party tool. And my favorite third-party tool for this use case is Rows. Because Rows allows you to connect to your Notion database, so it will pull out all the data from it, then create a chart, and then you can re-embed that chart into Notion. Just a very quick example, this is how it looks like. Here we have a Notion database, so this information is synced from my Notion database, and I can create a chart based off that, and I can just go, okay, please embed this, copy the URL, go to Notion, click here, paste it, pick the embed option, and now it renders me that chart. And again, since it is connected to my data in Notion, if I change anything there, it will live update this chart. If you want to know exactly how to do this, then check out the link in the description. I have a lot of tutorials on how to connect Notion to Rows and the different chart types that you can create. But yeah, for now, this is pretty much the only way to connect combo charts until Notion updates the native chart feature. So much for the overview over all available Notion charts. Now you know how to use every single Notion chart. If you now need some inspiration for all the things that you can do with these amazing charts, well, then check this video out. This is my release video for Notion charts and covers a ton of amazing use cases. Just click here and I'll see you in a second.